Hello, and welcome. Settle in, take a nice deep breath, and let the cares of the day begin to drift away. Tonight, we're journeying back in time, to the era of Alexander the Great. But this isn't a lecture, or a history lesson filled with jarring battles. Instead, I'll be sharing a gentle, soothing story, designed to help you relax, unwind, and peacefully drift off to sleep. If you enjoy these moments of calm and would like to experience more bedtime stories and relaxing content, please do consider subscribing to the channel. For now, just close your eyes, get comfortable, and let the story begin. Alexander the Great, a bedtime story.
The world of 356 BCE was a crucible of iron will and seething ambition, a canvas upon which gods and mortals alike seemed to paint destinies in bold, often bloody, strokes. Into this world, in Pella, the rugged heart of Macedon, a child was born whose name would etch itself into the annals of eternity, Alexander. His father, Philip II, was a king forged in the fires of military necessity and political cunning, a man transforming Macedon from a fractious backwater into a dominant Hellenic power through relentless warfare and shrewd diplomacy. His mother, Olympias, Princess of Epirus, was a figure of tempestuous passion and dark mystique, a devotee of Orphic and Dionysian rites, who claimed serpentine communion, and whispered to her son that his true sire was not Philip, but Zeus himself, king of the gods, who had visited her in the guise of a serpent. From these contrasting yet equally potent legacies, Alexander drew his essence. Olympias nurtured in him a fierce pride, an unshakable belief in a divine heritage and a destiny that soared beyond mortal limits. She wove tales of his ancestor Achilles, the tormented hero of the Trojan War, into the fabric of his young imagination, instilling a yearning, a pathos, for immortal glory. Philip, though often estranged from his volatile wife, recognized the prodigious spark in his son. He saw the keen intellect, the restless energy, the almost unnerving intensity in Alexander's heterochromatic eyes, one blue as the Aegean sky, the other brown as the Macedonian earth, that seemed to pierce through pretense and perceive the hidden currents of human nature. Alexander's youth was a tapestry of rigorous training and intellectual awakening. He learned to ride before he could properly wield a sword, to hunt lion and bear in the Macedonian wilderness, honing the physical courage that would later see him charge headlong into enemy ranks. But it was an incident with a horse that first truly signaled his extraordinary character. A magnificent black Thessalian charger, Bucephalus, was presented to Philip, but the animal was wild, unmanageable, rearing and striking at anyone who approached. Philip, exasperated, was about to dismiss the beast when Alexander, then perhaps 12 or 13, spoke out. He wagered he could ride the horse. Noticing what seasoned handlers had missed, Bucephalus was terrified of his own dancing shadow. With a calm assurance that belied his years, Alexander gently turned the stallion to face the sun, spoke soothingly, and then, with a fluid grace, leapt onto its back. Horse and boy moved as one, a perfect union of spirit and strength. Philip, watching with tears of pride welling in his eyes, declared, "My son, you must find a kingdom equal to your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." Bucephalus would become Alexander's faithful companion, carrying him across continents and through countless battles. To sculpt this exceptional mind, Philip procured the most renowned intellect of the age, Aristotle. In the tranquil Nymphaeum at Mysa, amidst shaded groves and flowing springs, the philosopher tutored the young prince and his coterie of noble companions, Ptolemy, Hephaestion, Cassander, boys who would later become his generals and successors. Aristotle opened Alexander's mind to the wonders of Greek literature, particularly Homer, whose Iliad became Alexander's constant companion, a well-thumbed copy kept beneath his pillow alongside his dagger. He was instructed in ethics, politics, rhetoric, biology, medicine, and metaphysics. Aristotle taught him the virtues of Hellenic civilization, the importance of reason, and perhaps even the concept of the magnanimous man. Yet, while Aristotle preached the golden mean, Alexander's spirit was drawn to the extreme, to the absolute. He absorbed the knowledge, but his innate ambition and the whispers of a divine destiny from Olympius pushed him towards a path far grander and more perilous than even Aristotle might have envisioned. The Macedonian court, however, was a viper's nest of intrigue. Philip's power, built on conquest and a network of strategic marriages, was constantly challenged from within and without. His decision in 337 BCE to marry Cleopatra Eurydice, a young Macedonian noblewoman, fractured the delicate balance. This seventh marriage aimed to secure a purely Macedonian heir, a move that infuriated Olympius, who feared for Alexander's succession, and deeply insulted Alexander himself. At the wedding banquet, Cleopatra's uncle, Attalus, already a powerful general, proposed a toast praying for a legitimate heir to the throne. The implication that Alexander, son of an Epirot princess, was somehow less legitimate, ignited Alexander's legendary temper. "Am I then a bastard, you villain?" he roared, hurling his goblet. Philip, flushed with wine and rage, drew his sword and lunged at his son, only to stumble and fall ignominiously. "Look, men," Alexander sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Here is the man who was preparing to cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another." The rift was profound. Alexander and Olympius went into self-imposed exile in Epirus, though a fragile reconciliation was later brokered. The storm broke in 336 BCE. During the lavish wedding festivities for his daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, to Alexander I of Epirus, Olympius's brother Aegae, the ancient capital, Philip II, at the height of his power and on the cusp of launching his grand invasion of the Persian Empire, was assassinated. Pausanias of Orestis, a disgruntled former member of his bodyguard, stabbed the king in the theatre. The motives remain debated: a personal grievance, a conspiracy involving Olympius, perhaps even Alexander, or rival powers fearing Philip's ascendancy. In the immediate, bloody aftermath, Alexander, barely 20 years old, acted with chilling decisiveness. Supported by Philip's most loyal generals, Antipater and Parmenion, and the Macedonian army, who hailed him king on the spot, he systematically eliminated all potential rivals. Amyntas IV, his cousin, was executed. Cleopatra Eurydice and her infant child were killed, allegedly on Olympius's brutal orders. Attalus, who was already in Asia Minor with an advance force, was assassinated. The throne, still slick with his father's blood, was secured. But Philip's death sent tremors throughout Greece. The city-states, yoked uneasily to Macedonian hegemony under the League of Corinth, saw an opportunity. Demosthenes in Athens thundered against the Macedonian boy. Rebellions flared in Thrace, Illyria, and notably, Thebes. Alexander's response was a thunderbolt. He marched south with incredible speed, appearing before the startled Greek cities almost before they knew he had left Macedon. When Thebes, misinformed that Alexander had been killed in the north, defiantly expelled its Macedonian garrison, his retribution was terrifying and exemplary. After a swift siege in 335 BCE, Thebes was razed to the ground. Its sacred sites were spared, as was the house of the poet Pindar, a nod to Alexander's Hellenic education, but thousands of Thebans were massacred, and the 30,000 survivors sold into slavery. The message was unambiguous: defiance would be met with annihilation. Greece, stunned into submission, reaffirmed his position as hegemon and pledged its forces for the Persian campaign. The Macedonian boy had proven he was very much a king. With Greece pacified, albeit through fear, and Macedon secured, Alexander turned his gaze eastward, to the colossal Persian Achaemenid Empire, the behemoth that had once threatened to engulf Greece and which his father had sworn to humble. For Philip, It was a war of revenge and strategic necessity. For Alexander, it was that, and infinitely more. It was the fulfillment of prophecy, the ultimate stage for heroic glory, the unquenchable yearning of his pothos made manifest. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander led his army, around 30,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, a formidable but not overwhelming force of Macedonians, Greeks, Thracians, and Illyrians, to the Hellespont. Before crossing, he visited Elaeus, where he sacrificed at the tomb of Protesilaus, the first Greek to die in the Trojan War. On the Asian shore, he was the first to leap onto the soil, hurling his spear into the ground and claiming Asia as Spear One. He then proceeded to Troy, the legendary site of Achilles' triumphs. There, he made sacrifices to Athena, exchanged his own armor for what was believed to be sacred armor from the Trojan War, and laid a wreath on the supposed tomb of Achilles, while his dearest friend and companion, Hephaestion, honored Patroclus. It was a masterstroke of symbolic theater, linking his campaign to the epic struggles of Hellenic myth, casting himself as a new Achilles destined for even greater deeds. The local Persian satraps of Asia Minor, under the command of Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek mercenary general in Persian service, initially underestimated the young king. Memnon advocated a scorched earth policy, retreating and denying resources to the Macedonians while using the superior Persian fleet to harass Alexander's supply lines and even carry the war back to Greece. However, the satraps, arrogant and eager for personal glory, rejected this sound advice, opting for a direct confrontation. They chose to make their stand at the Granicus River. The Persian cavalry, reinforced by formidable Greek mercenaries, lined the steep eastern bank, a strong defensive position. Alexander, arriving in the afternoon, was advised by his veteran general Parmenion to wait until morning to attack. Alexander, impatient and ever audacious, retorted, "I should be ashamed of myself if, after crossing the Hellespont, I should be held up by this paltry stream." He ordered an immediate assault. The battle was a maelstrom of courage and chaos. Alexander, at the head of his elite companion cavalry, charged across the river and up the muddy, treacherous bank, directly into the teeth of the Persian defense. The fighting was desperate and personal. Alexander himself was in the thick of it, his helmet bearing the distinctive white plumes making him an obvious target. He engaged Mithridates, Darius's son-in-law, in single combat and slew him. As another Persian noble, Rhesaces, brought his sword down on Alexander's head, cleaving his helmet, Alexander, though dazed, managed to spear him through the chest. At that critical moment, Mithridates, the satrap of Lydia and Ionia, raised his scimitar for a fatal blow from behind, but Cletus the Black, son of Alexander's nurse Lanica and commander of a cavalry squadron, severed Mithridates' arm, saving the king's life. The sheer ferocity of the Macedonian charge, spearheaded by Alexander, eventually broke the Persian cavalry. The Greek mercenaries in Persian service, however, fought on with grim determination, but they were surrounded and, with few exceptions, slaughtered. Alexander, recognizing their betrayal to the Hellenic cause, showed little mercy. The victory at Granicus was decisive. It shattered Persian authority in Asia Minor. City after Greek city in Ionia, Sardis, Ephesus, Miletus, after a brief siege, opened their gates, hailing Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule. He shrewdly restored democratic governments, endearing himself to the populace. As he moved inland through Phrygia, he reached Gordium, site of the legendary Gordian knot. Prophecy held that whoever could untie the intricate knot, fastening an ancient chariot to a pole, would rule all of Asia. After struggling with it for a time, Alexander, in a characteristic display of bold, decisive action, drew his sword and sliced it in half. Whether he truly solved it or simply bypassed the problem, the symbolism was potent. Alexander was not bound by conventional limitations, he would carve his own destiny. The Persian emperor, Darius III Codomaneus, a man of noble lineage but perhaps not the iron will of his predecessors, had initially dismissed Alexander as a minor nuisance. Granicus was a rude awakening. While Alexander consolidated his hold on Asia Minor, besieging coastal cities like Halicarnassus which held out stubbornly under Memnon, Darius began to assemble a vast imperial army, drawing troops from every corner of his sprawling domain. Memnon, his most capable commander, died of illness during the siege of Mytilene, a severe blow to Persian prospects. In 333 BCE, Darius, at the head of an army variously estimated at anywhere from 100,000 to several times that, though ancient numbers are notoriously unreliable, it was undoubtedly far larger than Alexander's, advanced to meet the Macedonian king. Alexander, having fallen seriously ill at Tarsus after bathing in the icy Cydnus River, recovered just in time. Darius, seeking to cut Alexander's supply lines, moved to a narrow coastal plain near Issus, a position he believed would negate the superior training and tactics of the Macedonians by restricting their maneuverability, and allowing his numerical superiority to tell. It was a strategic blunder. The terrain at Issus, hemmed in by mountains on one side and the sea on the other, was actually more suited to Alexander's smaller, more flexible force. When Alexander realized Darius was behind him, he swiftly turned his army around. The ensuing battle was a desperate affair. The Persian line was long and deep. Alexander, again commanding the companion cavalry on the right wing, noticed a gap that had opened in the Persian left center as Darius's Greek mercenaries clashed fiercely with the Macedonian phalanx. With his customary alacrity, Alexander led his companions in a wedge formation, punching through the weakened Persian line and then wheeling left, directly towards Darius himself. The sight of Alexander, his armor glinting, his eyes blazing, charging towards him, proved too much for the great king. As at Gaugamela later, Darius's courage failed him. He turned his chariot and fled the battlefield, his army, seeing their king abandon them, dissolving into a panicked rout. The slaughter was immense as the fleeing Persians were cut down by the pursuing Macedonians or trampled in the narrow passes. The spoils of Issus were staggering. Darius's camp, along with his royal chariot, bow, and shield, fell into Alexander's hands. More significantly, Darius's mother, Sisygambes, his wife Statira, his young son, and his daughters were captured. Alexander, in a display of chivalry that resonated throughout Asia, treated them with the utmost respect and honor, assuring Sisygambes that he fought Darius not out of personal enmity but for the dominion of Asia. Sisygambes, deeply moved, would come to regard Alexander with maternal affection. Darius, from his refuge, sent letters offering a vast ransom, a marriage alliance with his daughter, and all lands west of the Euphrates in exchange for his family and peace. Parmenion, ever the cautious adviser, reportedly said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander famously retorted, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." For Alexander, there would be no compromise. He aimed for nothing less than the entire Persian Empire. His strategic objective now was to secure the Mediterranean coastline, neutralizing the Persian fleet by capturing its bases. Most Phoenician cities, Arwad, Byblos, Sidon, submitted. But Tyre, the ancient and powerful island fortress, proud of its impregnable defenses and commercial might, refused. The Tyrians, confident in their naval superiority and massive walls rising directly from the sea, felt secure. Alexander, faced with this defiance, embarked on one of the most audacious and laborious sieges in ancient history, beginning in January 332 BCE. For 7 agonizing months, Alexander's engineers, driven by his relentless will, constructed a massive causeway, or mole, nearly half a mile long, across the sea channel to the island. The work was perilous. Tyrian warships sorted to attack the workers, and missile fire rained down from the city walls. The Tyrians even launched a massive fireship attack that devastated the initial mole and siege towers. Lesser commanders might have despaired, but Alexander's determination only hardened. He rebuilt the mole wider and stronger, assembled his own fleet from other Phoenician cities and Cyprus, eventually gaining naval superiority and blockading Tyre. Siege towers, some reportedly 160 feet high and bristling with catapults and ballistae, were floated into position. Finally, in July, the walls were breached. Alexander, leading the assault himself, was uncharacteristically savage. The Tyrians had fiercely resisted, even executing Macedonian prisoners on the walls in full view of the besiegers. Now, they paid a terrible price. Some 8,000 Tyrians were killed in the fighting, 2,000 men of military age were crucified along the shore as a horrifying example, and around 30,000 survivors were sold into slavery. The destruction of Tyre sent shockwaves across the region. Gaza, the next stronghold on the way to Egypt, also resisted stubbornly for 2 months and suffered a similar, brutal fate. Its commander, Battis, was reputedly dragged around the city walls behind Alexander's chariot, a grim echo of Achilles' treatment of Hector, an act, if true, that revealed a darker, more vengeful side to Alexander. Egypt, however, welcomed Alexander as a liberator from oppressive Persian rule. In late 332 BC, he entered the ancient land of the pharaohs without a fight. The Persian satrap Mazaces surrendered, and Alexander was crowned pharaoh, respecting local customs and religious traditions. Here, he made one of his most enduring contributions, the founding of Alexandria near the canopic mouth of the Nile. Its strategic location, excellent harbor, and proximity to both the Mediterranean and the Nile promised a vibrant future. He personally helped lay out the city's grid plan, envisioning it as a vital center of trade, culture, and learning, a vision that would be spectacularly realized. While in Egypt, Alexander undertook a remarkable and perilous journey deep into the Libyan desert to the oasis of Siwa, home to the famed oracle of Zeus Ammon, a syncretic deity combining the Greek Zeus with the Egyptian Ammon. The journey itself was an ordeal, with tales of sandstorms and divine guidance by ravens or snakes. What transpired in the inner sanctum between Alexander and the high priest remains largely a secret. Publicly, the priest greeted Alexander as son of Ammon. Alexander himself wrote to Olympias that he had received secret responses which he would reveal only to her upon his return. It is widely believed the oracle confirmed his divine parentage, or at least his divinely ordained mission. He emerged from Siwa visibly changed, his belief in his unique destiny further solidified, perhaps even subtly altering his perception of himself from king to something more. With Egypt secure and his aura of divinity enhanced, Alexander turned his forces eastward once more in 331 BCE, seeking the final confrontation with Darius. The Persian king, having learned from Issus, had spent the intervening year raising another colossal army, this time choosing his battlefield with care, the wide, open plains of Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq. The terrain was perfect for his scythed chariots, his cavalry, which outnumbered Alexander's significantly, and his Indian war elephants. He even had the ground leveled to ensure his chariots' maximum effectiveness. Alexander's army, though still outnumbered, was composed of seasoned veterans, utterly loyal and confident in their commander's genius. On the eve of battle, Parmenion, unnerved by the flickering campfires of the vast Persian host stretching across the plain, advised a night attack. Alexander, ever the proponent of open, decisive battle and perhaps mindful of his heroic image, dismissed the suggestion, "I will not steal my victory." He wanted to defeat Darius in broad daylight, for all the world to see. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought on October 1, 331 BCE, was Alexander's tactical masterpiece. Darius had deployed his forces in a massive line, with himself at the center, surrounded by his elite Persian infantry, the Immortals, and Greek mercenaries. Alexander, anticipating Darius's tactics, advanced with his right wing angled forward, drawing the Persian cavalry on their left flank further and further out, attempting to envelop him. This was precisely what Alexander wanted. As the Persian line stretched and thinned, a gap inevitably began to appear near Darius's left center. Alexander, leading his companion cavalry in their classic wedge formation, seized the critical moment, plunging into the gap with irresistible force, aiming, as at Issus, directly for Darius. Simultaneously, the Macedonian phalanx, though hard-pressed by the Persian onslaught, and the scythed chariots, whose effect was largely nullified by the disciplined infantry opening their ranks, held firm. For the third time, Darius III faced Alexander in battle. For the third time, his nerve broke. Seeing the companions bearing down on him, he turned his chariot and fled, his personal standard dipping as he did so. The news of the great king's flight rippled through the Persian ranks, and what had been a battle became a rout. The pursuit was relentless, though Alexander had to break it off to return and relieve Parmenion, whose left flank had been under severe pressure. The Persian losses were catastrophic, Macedonian casualties were, by comparison, light. Gaugamela effectively ended the Achaemenid Empire. The great cities of the Persian heartland now lay open. Babylon, with its legendary hanging gardens and ziggurats, surrendered without a fight, its satrap Musaeus welcoming Alexander. Alexander, showing astute statesmanship, retained Musaeus in his position and ordered his soldiers to respect the city and its people. He then proceeded to Susa, another administrative capital, where he seized an immense treasury, silver and gold beyond counting, accumulated over generations by the Achaemenid kings. From Susa, he marched to Persepolis, the ceremonial and spiritual capital of the empire, a city of magnificent palaces built by Darius the Great and Xerxes. After seizing its even vaster treasures, in a controversial and still debated act in early 330 BCE, Alexander allowed or ordered the royal palaces of Persepolis to be burned to the ground. Ancient sources offer conflicting accounts. Was it a deliberate act of policy, a symbolic revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens 150 years earlier? Was it the result of a drunken revelry, as some accounts influenced by Ptolemy, via Clitarchus, suggest, with the courtesan Thais inciting Alexander and his companions during a banquet? Or was it a calculated signal that the Achaemenid dynasty was irrevocably finished, and a new, Alexandrian era had begun? Whatever the exact reason, the destruction of Persepolis sent a powerful message, though it also alienated some Persians whose cooperation Alexander would later need. With Darius a fugitive in the eastern satrapies, Alexander pursued him relentlessly. The chase led him through Media and into Parthia. Darius, now a king with no kingdom, was betrayed by his own satraps, led by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, who had royal ambitions of his own. In July 330 BCE, near Hecatim Pylos, Alexander's advance guard found Darius dying in a wagon, murdered by Bessus's men. Alexander, arriving shortly after, is said to have covered the body with his own cloak, showing respect for his fallen adversary and vowing to avenge his death, a shrewd political move that positioned him as Darius's legitimate successor rather than merely a foreign conqueror. The hunt for Bessus, who had proclaimed himself Artaxerxes V, the new great king, drew Alexander deeper into the remote and rugged eastern satrapies of Bactria and Sogdia, modern Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. This was a new kind of war, not of set-piece battles but of brutal guerrilla warfare, against fierce mountain tribesmen in harsh, unforgiving terrain. For nearly 3 years, 330 to 327 BCE, Alexander campaigned tirelessly, founding new cities named Alexandria, Alexandria Escat, the furthest, on the Jaxartes River, marking the limit of his advance north. He captured Bessus, who was publicly mutilated and executed according to Persian custom for regicide. It was during this grueling period that Alexander, in 327 BCE, married Roxana, Roshinok, the beautiful daughter of Oxyates, a Sogdian nobleman. The marriage was partly a political move to pacify the region and foster reconciliation, but by all accounts, Alexander was also genuinely captivated by her beauty. However, these years also saw a disturbing transformation in Alexander. His adoption of Persian dress, the Candace robe and diadem, his introduction of Persian courtiers and customs, and his attempt to impose proskinesis, the Persian ritual of prostrating oneself before the king, caused profound resentment among his fiercely independent Macedonian veterans and Greek companions. They viewed these practices as barbaric and, in the case of proskinesis, an act of worship suitable only for a god, not their mortal king, however great. The historian Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew and the official chronicler of the campaign, openly opposed proskinesis and was later implicated in the Pages conspiracy, a plot by some of Alexander's young personal attendants, and died in captivity. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion and paranoia. In 330 BCE, Philotas, commander of the Campanian cavalry and son of Parmenion, was accused of failing to report a plot against Alexander's life. Under torture, he confessed, perhaps falsely, and implicated his father. Philotas was executed by the army, and Alexander, fearing Parmenion's reaction or potential rebellion, dispatched assassins to Ecbatana to murder the veteran general, who had served both Philip and Alexander loyally for decades. This ruthless act shocked many. Later, in 328 BCE, during a drunken banquet in Maracanda, Samarkand, a furious argument erupted between Alexander and Cletus the Black, the man who had saved his life at Granicus. Cletus, fueled by wine and resentment at Alexander's increasing Orientalism, and perceived slights against Philip and the Macedonians, loudly criticized the king. Alexander, in an uncontrollable rage, seized a spear and ran Cletus through. His immediate remorse was profound and demonstrative. He lay wailing over Cletus's body for days, refusing food and drink, consumed by guilt. But the deed was done, revealing the dangerous combination of absolute power, immense stress, and his fiery temper. Despite these internal tensions, Alexander's pathos drove him onward. India, the land of fabled wealth, exotic creatures, and wise philosophers, beckoned from beyond the Hindu Kush. In the summer of 327 BCE, he crossed the mountains and descended into the Indus Valley. Some local chieftains submitted, while others resisted. At Massaja, he faced fierce opposition, and after its chieftain was killed, the queen, Cleophas, negotiated a surrender, allegedly bearing Alexander a son. The most significant challenge came in 326 BCE at the Hydaspes River, modern Jhelum. On the far bank, King Porus, Porava, a towering figure of immense courage, awaited with a formidable army that included some 200 war elephants, creatures the Macedonians had never faced in such numbers. The river was swollen by monsoon rains. Alexander, through a series of brilliant feints and a daring night crossing upstream during a thunderstorm, managed to get a significant portion of his army across undetected. The Battle of the Hydaspes was one of Alexander's most difficult and tactically ingenious victories. The war elephants initially caused terror and disruption among the Macedonian ranks, their tusks and trampling feet wreaking havoc. But Alexander's archers targeted the mahouts, elephant drivers, and his infantry, with incredible bravery, attacked the elephants' legs with axes and spears, or used their long sarissas to wound them, causing some to run amok back into their own lines. Alexander's cavalry outflanked Porus's forces. Porus himself, fighting valiantly atop his lead elephant even after being wounded, was eventually persuaded to surrender. Alexander, deeply impressed by his courage and regal bearing, asked Porus how he wished to be treated. As a king, Porus replied. Alexander, in a remarkable act of statesmanship, not only restored Porus to his kingdom but also added more territory to his domain, making him a loyal ally. Bucephalus, his beloved charger, died shortly after the battle, either from wounds or old age, and Alexander founded the city of Nicaea, Victory, on the battle site, and Bucephala in his horse's honor. Alexander yearned to press on, to march to the Ganges, which he believed was near the Eastern Ocean, the edge of the world. But his army, after 8 years of unceasing warfare, thousands of miles from home, exhausted by the unfamiliar climate, drenched by monsoons, and unnerved by tales of even larger Indian armies and countless elephants further east, had finally reached its breaking point. At the Hyphasis River, his soldiers, led by the veteran officer Caenus, refused to go further. They pleaded to return home, to see their families and enjoy the fruits of their conquests. For 3 days, Alexander isolated himself in his tent, furious, pleading, cajoling, and threatening, but his men, though respectful, stood firm. It was the first and only time his will was successfully defied by his army. With a heavy heart, acknowledging the limits of human endurance, Alexander conceded. He ordered the construction of 12 massive altars to the Olympian gods, monuments to the extent of his campaign, and then, reluctantly, gave the order to turn back. The return journey, 326 to 325 BCE, was an epic of hardship. Alexander divided his forces. One part, under his direct command, marched south along the Indus River, encountering fierce resistance from the Malian tribes. During the siege of a Malian stronghold, Alexander, impatient with the slow progress, seized a ladder and was the first to scale the walls, followed by only a few companions. He leapt down into the citadel alone and was quickly surrounded, fighting desperately until an arrow pierced his lung. He was carried away, gravely wounded, and for a time, his army believed him dead, until he recovered sufficiently to show himself. Upon reaching the mouth of the Indus, he dispatched a portion of his army by sea, a fleet under the command of Nearchus, with orders to explore the coastline of the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf and find a sea route back to Mesopotamia, an unprecedented voyage of discovery. Alexander himself, with the main body of the army, chose to lead them overland through the treacherous Grosian Desert, Makran Desert in modern Pakistan and Iran, perhaps to emulate mythical heroes or to punish his men for the mutiny, or simply due to flawed intelligence about the route. The 60-day march was a cataclysm. Thousands perished from heat, thirst, starvation, and flash floods. Alexander shared their privations, famously pouring a helmetful of scarce water onto the burning sand when it was offered to him, declaring he could not drink when his men had none. It was a testament to his leadership that the army, though decimated, did not disintegrate. Emerging from the desert into Carmania, Alexander and his surviving troops, joined by Nearchus's fleet which had successfully navigated the unknown waters, indulged in a period of Dionysian revelry, perhaps as a release from the horrors they had endured. But upon returning to the heartlands of Persia in 324 BCE, Alexander found his empire in disarray. Many satraps, believing him dead or unlikely to return, had governed corruptly, embezzled funds, and abused their power. Alexander acted swiftly, executing several errant governors and restoring order. He also pushed forward with his policy of fusion between Greek and Persian cultures. At Susa, he staged a magnificent mass wedding ceremony, where he himself married Statira II, Darius's eldest daughter, and Parysatis II, daughter of Artaxerxes III, while Hephaestion married Drypotis, Statira's sister, also a daughter of Darius. 80 of his senior officers and some 10,000 of his soldiers also took Persian wives, with Alexander providing dowries. He further integrated 30,000 young Persian recruits, the Epigoni, successors, into the Macedonian army, trained and equipped in the Macedonian style. These measures, intended to create a unified ruling class and a loyal multicultural army, further alienated many of his Macedonian veterans, who felt their privileged status was being eroded and their traditions disrespected. At Opis, on the Tigris River, when Alexander announced his intention to send home the aged and wounded Macedonian veterans with lavish rewards, the army, misinterpreting this as a dismissal and replacement by Persians, mutinied again. Alexander, enraged, arrested the ringleaders and delivered a powerful, emotional speech, reminding them of all they had achieved together under his leadership and Philip's. A reconciliation followed, with a great banquet where Macedonians and Persians feasted together, Alexander praying for harmony and partnership between the two peoples. Tragedy struck in the autumn of 324 BCE in Ecbatana. Hephaestion, Alexander's closest friend, his confidant, his other self, his Patroclus to Alexander's Achilles, died suddenly from illness, likely typhoid fever, exacerbated by heavy drinking. Alexander's grief was boundless and extravagant. He went into deep mourning, refusing food for days, ordering public mourning throughout the empire, and executing Hephaestion's unfortunate physician. He sought sanction from the oracle at Siwa to worship Hephaestion as a divine hero and planned a colossal funeral pyre for him in Babylon, costing a fortune. Hephaestion's death left an irreparable void in Alexander's life, perhaps hastening his own decline. In the spring of 323 BCE, Alexander returned to Babylon. Despite his grief, his restless mind was already teeming with ambitious new projects: the circumnavigation and conquest of Arabia, the exploration of the Caspian Sea, further campaigns in North Africa against Carthage, and perhaps even the West. He was organizing his army and fleet, planning new city foundations, and continuing the integration of his vast empire. But the conqueror, who had defied death on countless battlefields, was not immune to disease. After a prolonged banquet in honor of Nearchus, followed by another bout of heavy drinking with Medius of Larissa, Alexander fell ill with a severe fever. For 11 days, his condition worsened. He suffered from chills, sweats, exhaustion, and increasing weakness. He was lucid at times, giving instructions to his generals, but gradually slipped into a coma. The Macedonian soldiers, fearing the worst and demanding to see their king, were allowed to file silently past his bed. He could only manage a faint wave of his hand. When his generals asked him to whom he bequeathed his kingdom, he is said to have whispered either toi kratistoi, to the strongest or to the worthiest, or, according to another tradition, that he named Perdiccas by giving him his signet ring. On June 10 or 11, 323 BCE, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, Alexander the Great died. He was just shy of his 33rd birthday. The exact cause of his death remains a historical mystery: malaria, typhoid fever, alcohol poisoning, or even assassination by poison are all debated possibilities. His death unleashed chaos. He left no clear or adult heir. Roxana was pregnant and would later bear him a son, Alexander IV, but he was an infant. His vast empire, held together by his personal genius and authority, almost immediately began to fragment. His leading generals, the Diadochi, successors, Antipater, Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Lysimachus, Antigonus, engaged in over 40 years of brutal power struggles and wars, carving out their own Hellenistic kingdoms from the carcass of his conquests: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, the Antigonid dynasty in Macedon and Greece. The dream of a politically unified world under a single ruler died with him. Yet, Alexander's legacy transcended the political fragmentation. His conquests irrevocably changed the world. He had toppled the mighty Persian Empire and carried Greek language. Koine Greek became the lingua franca, culture, and political thought to the banks of the Indus. This fusion of Greek and Eastern civilizations inaugurated the Hellenistic Age, a period of extraordinary cultural dynamism, scientific advancement, and philosophical innovation that lasted for 3 centuries. The numerous cities he founded, especially Alexandria in Egypt with its great library and museum, became radiant centers of learning, attracting scholars, scientists, and artists, and preserving and expanding human knowledge. As a military commander, Alexander was unparalleled. His tactical brilliance, his use of combined arms, his speed, his audacity, and his ability to inspire fanatical loyalty in his men are studied and admired to this day. He was undefeated in any major pitched battle, often facing and overcoming numerically superior forces in unfamiliar territory. But beyond the general and the empire builder was the man, a complex and contradictory figure, capable of great magnanimity and shocking brutality, intense loyalty and ruthless pragmatism, profound intellectual curiosity and consuming ambition. He saw himself as a civilizer, a uniter of peoples, yet his path was paved with bloodshed. He believed in his divine mission, driving himself and his men to the limits of human endurance and beyond. Alexander the Great remains an icon, a figure who embodies the zenith of human ambition and achievement, but also the tragic brevity of even the most extraordinary life. More than 2 millennia after his death, his name still evokes images of epic battles, fabled cities, and the relentless pursuit of an ever-receding horizon. He was a force of nature that swept through the ancient world, and its landscape was forever altered by his passing. His story is not merely a chronicle of conquests, but a profound meditation on leadership, destiny, the intoxicating allure of glory, and the enduring human quest to transcend mortal limits and touch the face of eternity.